Hi friends, I hope all are good and practicing very well. This time we are looking for more scenarios from the network policies. We have 4 scenarios now. First scenario will be explain how to isolate a pod in the cluster, and the second scenario will be about how to set outbound only connection to a specific pod. Then we will go to a scenario exactly the same as previous but a small difference. It will open to a port of a specific pod, and the final scenario is to set an inbound connection from a specific pod. Okay, without delay, let's go to the questions. The first question is, you can find some pods are running in the cluster, and you have to isolate the pod A from other pods. I will explain this question with the help of a diagram. Okay, as per the diagram, 4 pods are running in the cluster. By default, all pods can communicate each other. As per the question, we have to isolate the pod A from others. In order to achieve that, we have to apply a ingress and egress deny policy on the pods. Okay, before go to the cluster, I will show you one more thing. I have uploaded all the YAML files in the repository. If anyone needed the help for making the scenarios, then you can go to the repository and take the appropriate files. For example, for answering the first question, simply go to the repository and click on 31 a folder. Here you can find the all YAML files for making first scenario. Take one by one and run on the cluster. Done. We are ready for answering the question. I am requesting you to take the YAML files from the repository and make the exact scenario before answering each question. Let's go to the cluster. Okay, I have copied all files here. Let's apply all. Yes, the environment is ready. Let's check the IP address first. By default, all pods can communicate with each other, so let's check that first. Yes, pod A has the connectivity to the pod B. Let's check the connectivity to pod C. Similarly, we can check the connectivity to pod A from other pods. As we see, all pods are connecting each other. As per the question, we have to isolate the pod A. So let's go to the documentation and search for network policies. Just scroll down. Okay, we can take this YAML file for the reference. Just copy this much and paste it in a new YAML file. Name you can give anything, because in the question it is not mentioned, so I just given a meaningful name. Next we have to mention the match label. This label should be the label of the pod A, so let's find it. Copy the labels and paste it into the YAML file. Yes, our YAML file is ready. If we apply it, then all inbound and outbound traffic for the pods labeled app equals pod A will be blocked. Okay, let's apply it. Yes, policy has applied. Let's check connectivity now. No connectivity from the pod A to pod B. Next we can check to pod C. Here also no connectivity. Next we have to check inbound connection to the pod A. That also blocked. Okay, we are successfully completed this task. Okay, I will show you one more thing. What if I remove ingress from the policy? Let's try. Okay, we have removed ingress from the policy. Let's apply it. Okay, now you can see the inbound connection from other pods is getting now. Let's test the outbound connection. Only the outgoing connection blocked by the policy. Okay, let's try for ingress blocking. So let's edit the YAML file again, and this time remove the egress and add ingress only. Yes, as expected, now outgoing is opened for the pod and only incoming is blocking by the policy. That's it for now. We can go to the next scenario. The next question is, some pods are running in the cluster. Please make sure that the web pod can only communicate to the service pods. So in this question, we have to apply a egress policy on the web pod in order to control the outbound connection. Okay, I will explain with the help of the diagram. We have few pods. By default, web pod can communicate to all pods. As per the question, we have to restrict only the outbound connection to service pods, so we have to apply an egress policy in the web pod to service pod. Then rest of all outgoing connection will be blocked, and only will have outbound to service pods. Okay, let's go to the cluster. Please note, I added all YAML files for makes these scenarios in our repository, so please check out the repository, and make the scenario on your end. Let's apply all files. Okay, all pods are running, so our scenario is ready for solving. Let's check the connectivity now. Yes, WebPod has the outgoing connectivity to all pods. Okay, let's create a network policy for controlling the outbound flow. Here also we need the help of documentation. Let's search for network policies. Copy the policy and paste it in the YAML file. We don't need ingress, so let's remove. Just copy the egress block. Indentations are very important, so you have to be careful while copy-paste. We don't need the IP block and port. Just copy the pod selector. Okay, let's check the labels now. We need to find the web pod labels. Pod selector should be web pods labels. And the egress match labels should be service pod labels. Perfect. By applying this policy, then web pods will have outgoing connection only to the service pods. Okay, let's apply it and test it. Let's cross-check again. Okay, perfect. Let's apply. Policy is applied, but we have not changed the policy name. We ran the policy with default name. This is okay for this scenario, but in the exam, they will ask to create the network policy in specific name, so let's change the policy name. Yes, our policy is applied. Let's delete the old policy. Let's check the connectivity. OK, WebPod has the connection to Service Pod. Yes, as expected, WebPod outgoing connection to other pods are blocked. Yes, we have successfully completed this task. Next question is slight variant of this question. OK, without delay, let's go to the next question. Next question is, some pods are running in the cluster. Please make sure that the web pods can only communicate outbounds to the service pods port on 8080. So this almost similar to the previous one, but the difference is, this time they are asking to access to a specific port on a pod. OK, I will explain it with help of the diagram. We have some pods, and by default web pods can communicate with all pods. This time you can see the service pod have two container, so we need to consider that when we make an egress policy for the web pod. So here we will apply an egress policy to web pods to service pods on port 8080. OK, let's go to the cluster. OK, I already applied all YAML files from the repository. Please note, here you can see two containers are running in a service pod. Let's edit it for showing the container ports. We can see one container is running on port 8080, and another on port 80. OK, this time I'm using the previous network policy file, and I will modify it with help of the documentation. If we apply this policy, then the web pod will get outbound only connection to the service pod's all ports, which means to port 80 and 8080. As per the question, we have to allow the connection only to port 8080, so we need to add port block into this policy. Let's copy this session to YAML file. port should be 8080. Okay, let's apply it. Let's check the connectivity now. As you see, even ping will not allow, because ping is using port 7, we allowed only port 8080 to service pod. So let's try port 8080. Yes, you can see the port is open. Let's try for the second container port 80 on the service pod. Yes, as expected that port is not opened. Let's check on the other pod's port. That also blocked. Yes, we have successfully completed this task. Let's go to the next question. This is the last scenario in this part. Some pods are running in the cluster. Please make sure that the DB pod can only access from the application pod on port 3306, which means DB pod is listening on port 3306, and you have to apply an ingress policy on DB pods, and allow incoming only from the application pods. Let's look at the diagram. We have few pods. By default, all pods can access the DB pods. As per the question, we have to restrict that. It should only call from the application pods, so we have to apply an ingress policy on DB pod on port 3306, so application pod can communicate on port 3306, and rest of all pods will be blocked. Okay, let's go to the cluster. All pods are running. Let's check the connectivity now. Yes, from WebPod there is access to the DB pods on port 3306. Let's check rest of all pods. As you see, all pods can communicate to the DB pods on port 3306. We have to restrict it. Okay, let's copy the YAML file to the cluster. We can give a name for policy. In the exam they may specify any name, so the time you have to make the policy name as per the question. Pod selector match label should be DB pods labels. Let's copy the labels. We don't need egress. We don't need the IP block and namespace selector. We need to find the application pod label. Just copy it. Oh, we made some mistakes. Instead of equal to symbol we have to use column. Okay, let's change the port to 3306. Okay, our policy is ready. Let's apply it. Okay, let's check the connectivity now. From WebPod there is no connection. Similarly, from the service pod there is no connection. Oh, service pod has two containers. Let's specify a container. Now let's try from the application pod. Yes, it is working. We have successfully completed this task. Please note, networking is difficult and time-consuming, so you have to practice very well, and if you have any doubts or need any assistance, you can contact me. Let's go over the mistakes I made in previous classes. On the 10th question, I made an error by using only the image name instead of the correct format, nginx equals nginx 1.17. Vicky pointed this out in the command, so thank you, Vicky, for bringing it to my attention. Please make sure to use the correct command. Mistakes like this happen because I didn't verify the answer after making changes. If I had checked the answer after updating the image, I would have caught the issue. I encourage you all to verify each and every answer after making changes in the exam. Thank you for your support. See you in the next session.